This is part 2 of my analysis of this suspect in the Albert Kite case. In part 1 of my case analysis, I was at the academic counter-intel encounter, so I will continue with that. Let us address the specific identity of the academic who stood face to face with the killer. In the media file, she is frequently generalized as a local professor or a housing manager, but according to police case data, the University of Denver faculty member who interviewed the suspect is a female professor. When the man calling himself Robert Cooper met with her to view her available rental property, her maternal and instinctual red flags immediately went up. As she walked him through the space, he began making inappropriate, highly predatory remarks that made her feel deeply unsafe. But it was her sharp background as an academic that cracked his operational security wide open. She instantly recognized the distinct phonetic baseline of a native Romanian speaker bleeding through his spoken English. So his English must have been good. Most people who grow up in Romania don't learn English, at least at the time when this suspect grew up in Romania. He probably grew up in Romania in the 1950s or 1960s, maybe 1970s. But looking at the sketch of the suspect, which I showed you, he does have a few wrinkles. He does not have any gray hair. He probably colored his hair in the color brown or in color black, but he could be late 40s, early 50s, so that would place him at date of birth 1950s or maybe 1960s. So he must have been in the United States, according to my estimation, at least 3 to 5 years prior to the year 2004. When this female professor directly pressed the suspect on it, asking him where he was originally from, his strict discipline slipped. He dropped his fake East Coast backstory. He looked her in the eye and he explicitly confirmed to her that he was indeed from Romania. He instantly realized that this woman possessed the specific regional intelligence to compromise his entire fake identity protocol. Because she was a female academic who could see right through his mask, he completely crossed her off his target list. He vanished from her property and he moved on to hunt for a softer target, ultimately finding Oakey Albert Kite. The corporate trajectory of Stone and Webster. Let us track the institutional landscape Albert Kite navigated for over 30 years. Albert wasn't sitting in a quiet local accounting firm. He was tied to Stone and Webster, one of the most powerful engineering, nuclear infrastructure, and heavy industrial mega corporations in American history. Al joined the company in 1971 just as Stone and Webster was aggressively expanding its nuclear construction footprint across the United States. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the company was responsible for building major nuclear infrastructure, including the Surrey Power Station in Virginia, the Beaver Valley Power Station in Pennsylvania, and the 9 Mile Point Nuclear Station in New York. As a project accountant and department head, Al followed the cash flow. He was deployed all over the nation to oversee massive capital projects. Records show him managing industrial projects industrial project accounts in Massachusetts, Texas, New York, Nevada, Wyoming, and Tennessee. He was even deployed internationally to manage logistics for a major engineering project in the North African nation of Algeria. However, by the late 1990s, Stone and Webster hit severe financial headwinds due to major corporate debt and project overruns. In the year 2000, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and its assets were fully acquired by the Shaw Group. Albert, a fiercely loyal and stable company asset, remained consistent through these structural corporate shakeups. By 1998, his long-term tenure earned him a permanent transfer to Aurora, Colorado, to work as a trusted project manager for a local office. The wall of security, nuclear defense clearances. Working in the nuclear infrastructure sector during the peak of the Cold War required passing through intense domestic security screening. When Al was deployed, the Surrey nuclear power plant near Richmond, Virginia, when Al was deployed to the Surrey nuclear power plant near Richmond, Virginia, he wasn't just handed an entry badge. Because nuclear power plants are designated as high-risk, critical national defense infrastructures, every corporate accountant, project manager, and engineer with access to structural blueprints, capital expenditures, or on-site facility layouts had to secure specialized federal clearances. Albert would have been subjected to a rigorous background screening protocol managed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC. This process involves extensive fingerprinting, a comprehensive federal background check, a multi-year audit of personal financial histories to rule out foreign blackmail vulnerabilities, and a deep psychological assessment. Albert passed these strict operational criteria with flying colors. For over 3 decades, he held a completely unblemished record of high-level corporate and industrial trust, the exact opposite profile of the shadowy, deceptive predator who would eventually infiltrate his home. The amicable bachelor, the lost years in California. This brings us directly to Al's private family history. Many people assume Al lived his whole life as a quiet, isolated bachelor in Colorado. But Al was once a dedicated family man. During his early career with Stone and Webster, Al met and married his wife, Gail. Together they built a life, and Al became a loving, deeply committed father to his stepdaughter, Julie. So she wasn't his biological daughter. She was or is his stepdaughter. But in which city did Al live with his wife and daughter? During the peak years of their marriage, Al's corporate assignments anchored the family deep within California. It was there, amidst the booming infrastructure projects of the West Coast, that they raised Julie. However, the constant travel, shifting corporate assignments, and intense demands of national industrial projects took an unavoidable toll. In 1988, Al and Gail officially divorced. But what makes Al's character stand out is that this separation did not end in bitterness. It was an exceptionally amicable divorce. Albert didn't walk away with a lingering resentment. He remained deeply, lovingly close to his stepdaughter Julie for the rest of his life, constantly acting as a supportive father figure even as he entered a new chapter as a single bachelor in California and eventually in Colorado. The hidden fortune, the millionaire next door. Let us look at a financial contradiction that completely upends the initial police assumptions about this case. When Robert Cooper executed his escape on 22nd May 2004, he drove away in Al Kite's personal vehicle, a 1983 GMC Sierra pickup truck. Think about the math of that vehicle. In 2004, that GMC truck was 21 years old. It was a fading, high-mileage work truck with a total street valuation of maybe $1,000 to $2,000 at best. To the casual observer passing by South Helena Street, where Al lived at the time, Albert Kite looked like a struggling, low-budget citizen living paycheck to paycheck. He lived in a modest, middle-class suburban townhouse layout. He drove a 2-decade-old truck. He was actively placing cheap advertisements in local papers to rent out his basement bedroom for extra monthly cash. But appearances can be entirely deceptive. As a top-tier senior project manager who had successfully overseen multi-million-dollar industrial infrastructures for 33 consecutive years, Al Kite was likely earning an estimated $6,000 to $10,000 per month, a massive salary for the era. Even though he had split assets with his wife Gail during the 1988 divorce, Al had over 15 years of uninterrupted high-earning bachelor income to rebuild his wealth. Al was the living definition of the millionaire next door. He was an incredibly frugal, low-budget individual who harbored absolutely zero interest in displaying his wealth to the public. He drove that old GMC because it ran perfectly and he saw no reason to waste money on material vanities. He rented out his basement bedroom not because he was desperate for rent cash, but because he was a friendly social bachelor who preferred having human company around his quiet townhouse. He had massive savings structures, retirement accounts, and liquid capital tucked safely away in banking systems, assets that his killer didn't even understand or look for, because the monster was hunting for a silent, soundproof basement, not a high-end corporate vault. So, what does all that mean? It means, according to my assessments, Al Kite probably had a lot of money stored in banks and in savings accounts and in retirement portfolios, but he was not displaying that wealth. He was driving a 21-year-old GMC truck, and he was living in a modest townhouse. Let me take another look at this sketch of the suspect because I want to talk about it. So this does not look like somebody in his late 30s. This looks like somebody in his early 40s or mid 40s or late 40s or early 50s. The silhouette, analyzing the police sketches. Look closely at the face in your mind, at the face at the sketch which I just showed you. Take a long hard look at the features captured in this police composite sketch. When you study the geometry of this face, it becomes instantly clear that we are not looking at a common street thug or a disorganized local predator. This is a serious, highly mature alpha male countenance. It is characterized by severe masculine jaw framing, intense eyes, and deeply hard facial angles. This is the visual baseline of a man who has lived on an intense state structure. It is the signature look of a former state intelligence officer from Eastern Europe. Yes, look at this sketch. It is the signature look of a former state intelligence officer from Eastern Europe or from Romania. His cold expression mirrors the absolute clinical precision he displayed while methodically cleaning the entire basement with bleach, ensuring his environment was totally sanitized before melting away into the dark. The Romance language versus the Slavic divide. Let us address the linguistic reality that completely locks down his national origin. So this suspect, he spoke Romanian, and I can guarantee you with absolute certainty that this means he is a native of Romania. He's not a resident of neighboring Balkan nations like Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, or Croatia. Why can we make this distinction so clearly? Because of the structural rules of language. Romanian is a Romance language rooted deeply in Latin, sharing structural and phonetic traits with Italian, Spanish, and French. By contrast, the languages of the former Yugoslav republics, such as Serbian, Croatian, Slovenian, and Bosnian, as well as Bulgarian, are Slavic languages which share grammatical roots and phonetics similar to Russian. A native speaker from Serbia or Bulgaria cannot simply fake or naturally speak fluid Romanian without intense, deliberate study. If he was conversing naturally and confirming his background, his biological and cultural passport belongs exclusively to Romania. The bureaucratic ghost, pensioners over businessmen. This leads us to a fascinating economic mystery. How did this man generate money for his daily expenses, his rental deposits, and his food while living under a false identity in the United States? Think about the sheer scale of the horror scene. The killer tortured Albert Kite for 6 agonizing hours. If his primary motive was greed, then he had more than enough time to force Al to sign over a power of attorney to execute wire transfers or to reveal passwords to the estimated $500,000 life savings that Al had built up over a 30-year engineering project management career. But the killer didn't touch it. He didn't even try. Why? Because this man, this suspect, this killer was completely indifferent to wealth. The people who chose to become internal enforcement assets and intelligence officers for the brutal Romanian state apparatus under the dictatorship were never high-rolling businessmen looking to earn millions of dollars. They were cold, institutional civil servants. They chose that terrifying line of work because they wanted the ironclad job security of a government position, and their psychological profiles fit a deeply dark, sadistic, masochistic mindset pattern that fed on control. It is highly probable that this man has been surviving quietly in America by receiving a modest monthly retirement pension wired directly from the state archives of Romania. In that region, a standard state security or military pension for a retired mid-level officer is incredibly small, often equating to a mere $300 per month. But he didn't need millions. He lived a low-budget life, utilizing his minimal state pension to fund his simple, transient lifestyle while letting his sadistic urges drive his criminal operations. The linguistic mask, the accent paradox. Let us clear up the exact mechanics of the suspect's fateful meeting with that female university academic. When the suspect stood in front of her, she did not necessarily look at him and instantly identify his exact town of birth. Rather, she was an expert instructor who was teaching English language learners. The moment he spoke English to her, her trained ear immediately caught a heavy, distinct Eastern European accent. To a casual observer, a native Romanian speaking English can sound remarkably similar to a native Serb or Croat speaking English, as the regional mouth movements carry overlapping inflections. But this professor possessed a sharp, inquisitive mind. Recognizing the general regional accent, she either directly threw out a few targeted words in the Romanian language to test him, such as Bună, which means good day, or Bine, which means good, or she pressed him specifically on his exact geographic origin. The suspect, caught off guard by her directness, let his guard slip for a second, and he responded cleanly in Romanian, confirming her suspicion. He realized in that exact instant that she had completely penetrated his Robert Cooper mask. She knew too much, she was too linguistically advanced to be fooled, and that is exactly why he fled her property and never contacted her again. Let me give you a few details about falaka, which is the method which the suspect used to torture Albert Kite. Falaka, also frequently referred to in forensic and clinical medical literature as falanga or bastinado, is a highly specialized ancient method of corporal punishment and state-sponsored torture. It involves the systematic, repeated application of blunt force trauma to the bare soles of a victim's feet. So that is the torture that was applied to Al. This technique is heavily utilized by intelligence agencies, military regimes, and secret police forces across Eastern Europe, across North Africa, and across the Middle East. This is because it is intentionally engineered to inflict maximum agonizing physical pain and psychological terror without causing immediate death or leaving easily detectable external scars. Mechanisms of immobilization. To perform falaka effectively, the torturer must achieve absolute immobilization of the victim's lower extremities so that every blow lands cleanly on the target tissue without the foot sliding away. Historically and modernly, this is done using two primary setups. The suspension method. The victim is forced onto their back. Their ankles are secured tightly to a heavy wooden or metal pole. This pole is then hoisted and held up by assistants or mechanical rigs, locking the victim's legs into an elevated position with the bare soles facing vertically outward toward the torturer. Or the other method, the prone restraint method. The victim is bound tightly face down or hog-tied like it was done to L on a flat surface or floor. Their knees are bent at a 90-degree angle, forcing the soles of the feet upward. In the case of Albert Kite, his complex 40-foot rope cross bindings above the knee and around his upper arms precisely mirrored this restraint blueprint, locking his legs to completely locking his legs to completely expose his feet to his attacker. Instruments of trauma. The weapons chosen by Falaka are always blunt, dense objects designed to compress deep internal tissues rather than lacerate the outer layer of skin. Common instruments include heavy rubber truncheons, thick electrical cables, or military belt buckles, or wooden rods, canes, switches, or the flat aspect of heavy blades. In rare civilian cases such as the Kite murder scene, the operative substituted professional gear with a heavy steel kitchen honing rod, which is a knife sharpener, which perfectly matches the thickness, density, and blunt force dynamics of a standard state issue Falaka instruments. Okay, one more thing, acute physical consequences of this Falaka torture method. So the anatomy of the human foot sole consists of a dense network of microcapillaries, fine nerve endings, and a specialized fibrous fat pad designed to absorb the shock of regular walking. Falaka systematic striking creates devastating internal trauma. The blunt force ruptures the underlying capillary beds, causing massive internal bleeding and bruising of the foot and pooling of fluid within the deep, non-expanding facial compartments of the foot. Now, let me say one more thing about what an intelligence officer who served as a civil servant in Romania would maybe receive as a pension if he was living in the United States. An intelligence officer from Romania who served for 10 to 20 years before separating or retiring from the intelligence service in Romania would currently receive an estimated $800 to $1,500 per month, which is approximately 3,600 to 6,800 Romanian lei. That's the exchange rate. The exact layout of how these pensions operate exposes a controversial dual layered system within Eastern Europe. The special pension advantage. In Romania, intelligence officers such as those serving in the SRI, Romanian Intelligence Service, or the SIE, the Foreign Intelligence Service, do not follow the standard points-based civilian retirement model. Instead, their retirement is governed by special military pension laws. The calculation, unlike civilians whose pensions are averaged over their entire working life, military or intelligence officers' retirement pay in Romania is calculated based on 65% to 85% of their average gross earnings from their final consecutive months of active service. So they get a relatively high pension. The base for Romanian standards, the baseline, this structural advantage ensures that even a mid-level operational officer walks away with a monthly baseline that drastically exceeds the average civilian pension in Romania. The current average service pension for these combined structures hovers around $1,200 to $1,300. The 10-year versus 20-year service discrepancy. So why am I saying that? Because this suspect, he might have worked as an intelligence officer in Romania maybe for 10 years only, or maybe for 15 years, or maybe for 20 years. We don't know that. So let's look at these numbers. The 10-year versus 20-year discrepancy. The number of years served triggers very rigid administrative rules regarding eligibility. The 20-year career profile. A retired intelligence enforcer in Romania who completed a solid 20 years of effective intelligence service qualifies for a full regular state service pension because state intelligence salaries are higher than national averages. Their pension scales toward the top tier of military retirement, bringing in roughly $1,200 to $1,500 or even more per month. So in average, for somebody who worked for 20 years for one of the intelligence services of Romania, he could receive about $1,200 per month pension, or up to $1,500 per month, up to $1,500 per month, or even more. Now, if he only worked for 10 years in the intelligence services in Romania, the 10-year fracture profile to collect the standard retirement pension in Romania's military or security framework, an operative must typically hit a minimum insurance or active duty threshold of 15 to 25 years. An operative who served for only 10 years before leaving, such as fleeing the country or being purged following a geopolitical transition, would not qualify for a standard retirement timeline. Instead, they would receive a heavily reduced, penalized, prorated allowance or a structural disability reserve component allocation that sits at a much lower fraction, often collapsing to baseline around $400 to about $700 per month. Historical purchasing power versus global wire transfers. So we're talking about this suspect here. If an operative like this suspect, an intelligence operative, went rogue or fled to the United States around the turn of the millennium, so the year 2000 or before, receiving this money introduces unique logistics. The 2004 baseline versus modern indexing. In 2004, the value of money in Romania was entirely different. A standard retirement pension back then was minimal, equating to around $100 to $300 a month due to hyperinflation cycles in the late 1990s. So he would have only received $100 to about $300 per month pension in 2004. The modern value over the last 2 decades, legislative updates, indexations, and the alignment of defense spending pushed these special military pensions up significantly. If this killer is actively collecting a state pension from the archives of Bucharest, those automated monthly deposits have scaled into a modest but steady stream of modern international funds. So, thank you for having joined me for this in-depth look at the Albert Kite case. If you know of anybody who came from Romania in the 1990s or 1980s to the United States or to Canada, and who might have worked for the intelligence services or for the secret police of Romania or for Eastern Europe, leave your details in the comments. Leave some information about that in the comments if you know somebody like that, and report it to the police department in Denver. And I have great news. I have found a legal way to legally obtain 10,000 DNA profiles from Romania. So I will talk to the police detectives, to the responsible police detective in Denver about that. We could obtain 10,000 or even up to 100,000 DNA profiles from Romania. The problem would be to scan these into a database, and then they would have to be compared to the DNA of this suspect. So this might be a project that this channel will be taking on to collect DNA from Romania. There's a legal way to do that, and I will discuss that with the lead detective, and he can tell me if they're interested in that, and maybe you, our viewers, can sponsor that. Thank you very much again for listening and watching this in-depth Crime-Alyze analysis.